Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Town and Gown. For those of you who are new, this is a collaboration among 3 different groups: Age Alive in the College of Osteopathic Medicine, Prime Time, East Lansing Senior Centre, and the Social Science Scholars Programme. I'm John Waller, the director of the programme, and my job is just to briefly welcome everybody. Thank our speaker, Kelly, for generously giving up her time this evening. And then to briefly introduce Zach Sabri, who will be our student moderator this evening. Zach is a member of the Scholars Programme. He's also a global history major. And Zach, also French. And Zach's plans are to graduate and then do Peace Corps. So over to you, Zach, to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Waller. And today it is my great pleasure to present to you Professor Kelly Mcarthur. She is a highly accomplished graphic designer as well as a retired 2-time rowing Olympian. And most recently, she was selected to be the artist in residence for the Tokyo Olympic Games. So I'll let her take it away.
Thank you. I'm really flattered to be here, and I was so happy when John reached out and asked me to be a part of this series. The more chances I get to talk about this kind of stuff, the better.
But I'm not.
So I have a few screens open here. First, I'm going to try to share my screen and make sure you guys can see what I'm seeing. Let's do this. Okay, so hopefully you can see the title page. Is that coming through okay, Zach? Okay. So as both Zach and John said, I'm a graphic designer and a rower, a 2-time Olympic rower. It's these thousands of miles that I've rowed on both natural and man-made waterways around the world that has instilled in me an awareness of the natural environment. And so for tonight's presentation, what I'm going to do is begin by talking about some of my design work and how that led into what I did as an Olympian artist in residence for this past summer in the Tokyo Games. And I'm going to talk about rowing a bit and show you some images that I don't often show in professional presentations, but hopefully it will all kind of start to pull things together for all of you. As a graphic designer, I've recognized that activism through graphic design is especially relevant in this era of extreme dichotomy. So the designer's author role allows me to reflect on my beliefs and share them with a broader community through the tools of visual communication, that being type, color, image, plane, space, shape, so on. Considering such opportunities and responsibilities, I've focused my creative research over the past 16 or 17 years on environmental concepts, as I believe these to be fundamental and immediate to the survival of humankind, as well as the ecosystems that we impact and are a part of. Doing so is a way to creatively participate in and perhaps sway the ongoing dialogue of urgency that is often met with inaction. So what you see here is one of 3 posters that I designed. These are 3-dimensional posters. It's actually the same poster, but in different positions and different points of view. This one is titled Look, and the text that's hidden in there reads, look forward, look for reason, reflect, and respect. The series is meant to tap into the senses through which humans can connect with nature. And I really think that we've become so ingrained in our comfort and our convenient lifestyles that a lot of times we forget to connect. But we would probably respect nature more if we did find time to connect. This is actually, I don't know if you guys can see this. I'm just going to close that. This is the second in the series of 3, titled Listen. Listen instinctively, intelligently, in silence and in solitude. In all of these posters, I use my own photography. I'm really focusing on not only the dimensionality of the posters to emphasize the message, but also considering how the type and image can work together to convey this meaning and this message in a dynamic way. And the third of the series is feel. Feel in balance, feel human, feel whole, at peace, and at one. Out of the 3 posters, this is the most tactile. So you can see there's a pattern of die cut holes through that last, most left panel of the poster. The entire back of it is mounted with felt. So it's meant to be a tactile experience of a poster. And another 3-dimensional poster I designed is titled One Drop. This is meant to illustrate that each choice that we make, each action has ramifications, environmentally speaking. So you can see here that the O of one is bisected down the center. The poster is meant to be hung in the corner of a room as if that action that begins these concentric circles is coming from that point where the corner of the room is created and then kind of bouncing off of that area. This is a close-up where you can see, again, I'm working with my own photography. These are photographs that came from the Looking Glass River near East Lansing. And the typography is trying to be integrated with these slivers of imagery. Through working with this kind of work, I've discovered Shinrin Yoku, which is a Japanese practice. In English, we would call it forest bathing. It's preventative health care and healing that benefits the immune system, blood pressure, stress, mood, focus, energy level, sleep, and recovery. This is actually, it's exactly what it sounds like. The idea is to put yourself in a forest or in a fully natural environment and try to absorb as many things through your senses as possible. Forest bathing will kind of come up again as I keep talking here. Another poster, this one is not 3-dimensional. This is just a flat printed plane. I use a quote by Robert Cedar from the BBC History, who wrote that nature touches us, and even more extraordinary, does not ignore us. A nightingale may answer a cello. So that comment was based on a 1924 recording of the cellist Beatrice Harrison, who was recorded in her garden playing her cello and being actually answered by a nightingale. And this became a favorite broadcast for the BBC. They would broadcast it every year on the same day. And I thought it was such a beautiful kind of capturing of a human and natural balance and a dialogue that was being created. And actually that got a lot of attention, that was embraced by the listeners of BBC. I also thought of the nightingale almost like a canary in the coal mine. Like if there's a balance, how can we maintain it? And what are the indications of the balance maybe being off kilter? I designed this a few years ago and created it in response to the declining bee population. We all remember when that was a big headline that bee colonies were collapsing. And of course, our food sources rely on them being part of the ever important ecosystem. This is a 3D print, or at least the honeycomb part is. The rest of it is an assemblage of birch bark and radiant light film. And within the honeycomb, you can make out some letter forms. So here's a C and an O, L, O, N, Y, and C, O, H, A, B, I, T for colony and cohabit. Back in 2010, Ann Arbor hosted what they called the Urban Forest Project, which was a project and initiative that was happening in different cities across the United States. The first one happening in New York City. So a handful of designers were invited to design banners that hung on Main Street in Ann Arbor to promote a greening of the urban area and living with the benefits that trees can give us. And this was not a banner, this was a poster that I designed after the 2010 Gulf oil spill. The quote that you can see that radiates from the droplet of water, it's supposed to represent half water and half oil, those two things not mixing. Man is always looking for the oil and the resources and taking that out of the earth. Nature would allow us to have fresh water if we didn't mess with it. Anyways, the quote is by Rachel Carson, who of course is the author of Silent Spring. In an age when man has forgotten his origins and is blind even to his most essential needs for survival, water, along with other resources, has become the victim of his indifference. And after I was reading Fritjof Capra's concepts of deep ecology, which is such a brilliant yet simple concept that the intrinsic values of all living beings includes viewing humans as just one strand in the web of life. That's Fritjof Capra's deep ecology. After reading that, I designed this poster. So the more I work through this work in graphic design and through my research, I really do see us as just one small part of the web of life, or the ecosystems that we are a part of. And I think we need to recognize that we're just one part and we're not the dominant part, although we act like it. I've done some community outreach projects. So for this is a green map. If none of you have heard of a green map, this is another really simple but brilliant concept where, of course, we know maps to be topographic or based on destination, major markers, but a green map asks the user to actually go into an environment and recognize what the pros and the cons of the environment are. So where is there a natural habitat? Where is there a protected area? Where is the traffic really bad? And where's the pollution bad? I partnered with the River Raisin Institute of Monroe, Michigan. I did 2 maps. This was the second one that I actually did with them, because they had recognized they're an environmentally active organization, a nonprofit, but they recognize a real disconnect in Monroe because there's a lot of agriculture going on there, but the natural and the healthy food is not actually made accessible to the local residents. So what this map shows, if you see these yellow kind of bullseye things, those are food deserts. That's where someone finds themselves to be more than a 10-mile radius away from any natural or healthy food options. In the sidebar here, you can see some of the 88 locations that we plotted. We were looking for farmers markets and food banks and community gardens and organic and local food and healthy eating, local businesses, eco agriculture and permaculture and so on. On the back of this, and this was printed large format, and I'll fold it up to be about the size of a typical map that we all used to use before we were following our phones around. On the back was additional information about how to live a green lifestyle. So we were talking about buying local and eating local, why it's important to use a reusable water bottle and not disposable plastic water bottles, how to be safe with buying water when and if you do, how to recycle, how to compost, why you should use reusable grocery bags. Along with this, I also designed a little booklet. So it's a small booklet passport that we've passed out to K through 12 children. And it was meant as an activity book where they could go into their yard or their neighborhood, or they could walk to school and watch for all the green areas, all the environmentally rich areas that they were a part of, that they could help support. I also laser cut these medallions. So that was a grassroots effort to kind of spread the word even further. There were 3 large-scale maps in the local library, so people could go to their neighborhoods and plot these spots that they had recognized, and then go to the local library and add it to the community map. And the last design project that I'll end with before I kind of shift gears into rowing is a collaboration I did with the British poet Maura Dooley. I had come across her poster that's titled "Still Life with Sea Pinks and High Tide," and it really seemed to capture so many of the things that I was trying to communicate in my own work. So what I did was I used her poem to create a piece of concrete poetry, so a tactile piece of poetry here. This is spread across 5 panels that are etched anodized aluminum and folded, so they kind of come off the wall at you. And I'll just read through these panels as I show them to you. Thrift grows tenacious at the tide's reach. What is that reach when the water is rising? Rising. Our melting, shifting, liquid world won't wait. From manifesto or mandate, each warning a reckoning. Ice in our gin or vodka chirrups and squeaks, dissolving in the hot, still air of talking. So this is what they look like when the series is mounted to a wall. You can see that it starts relatively off the wall plane, and then it sinks down into the surface as if the plane itself is being affected by the water levels of water to land that are being disrupted. Okay, and now I'm going to drastically shift gears and show, this is really a photo I never show anybody. I was 17. This was the first time I had rowed for the United States. I was right out of high school and I was stroking for the United States junior rowing team. Here I am in Barcelona in between races. You'll notice the big hump on my back is a huge ice pack. I didn't know at the time how seriously I had injured myself, but this would be an injury that has stayed with me through my Olympic rowing career, and now I still continue to live with. I had pulled the muscle, my lat muscle, off my rib cage in the back and off the front, and I was only able to race because I was on serious painkillers and muscle relaxers. And by the time I got back to the United States and I didn't have any more of that medication, I was really in bad shape and had to kind of hold my arm. This is another interesting photograph, more interesting than the first one I just showed you. I'm right here. I'm the second one in the stack. This is what my crazy coach, Igor, who was originally from the Ukraine, but had been hired by the United States to coach the USA sculling team. He called these body squats. So of course the idea is based on how much the people weigh who are stacked on top of you, that's what determines how much you're squatting. So Grant here is taking all the weight and we're just holding on to the boat racks to stabilize the stack of us so we don't fall backwards. This is a terrible idea for so many reasons. One being is that we were at an Olympic training center with an Olympic training weightlifting room, but Igor really had this crazy idea that we should be doing these kind of medieval exercises to make us tougher. If one of us had our arms or our shoulder in a bad position and the entire stack of people would go down, there'd be nothing that we could do to stop it. You know, I kept thinking my shoulder was going to get dislocated or something. We each had our turn on the bottom. When I would do body squats, I think I only had 2 people on my shoulders. But that's insane to see what we were doing. And this is one reason why we get injured. And this is a photograph that I show because it demonstrates why I always felt like an underdog. So this is me. These are my teammates for that. This was the last year I was on the national team in 2005. We were competing at the World Championships in Gifu, Japan. I always knew I was short in relationship to the rowing crowd. And admittedly, I don't think I'm standing up as straight as I could, but it was an uphill battle to defend my seat every year and keep up with these amazing, naturally talented athletes. Okay, and this will be the last photograph I show of myself rowing or in this presentation. This is me in the stroke seat of the Sydney 2000 Olympic quad. The quad means that we each had 2 oars each, and the quad also means that there were 4 rowers in the boat. The biggest boats that you guys will see is an 8-person, and so that's a sweep boat, which means everybody in that boat only has 1 oar, and they're rowing asymmetrically, and there's a coxswain at the front. But with sculling, there's no coxswain, so we're doing all the steering and the coaching essentially from inside the boat. And we each have the 2 oars, so our bodies are staying centered over the keel of the boat, and we're rowing symmetrically. This picture was taken right as we're coming off the starting line. That's why we look so calm and collected. We're not breathing hard yet, we're not grimacing, but things were going to get more interesting as that race went on. The Olympic Games are the culmination of an athlete's many years of sacrifice and effort. The Olympics are the destination after a long, painful, arduous journey that tests physical, spiritual, and mental will. During this brief 2-week span, the world turns its attention to the feats of amateur athletes who may generally be otherwise inconspicuous. Olympic culture is a global sisterhood and brotherhood of respect for this peaceful and unparalleled experience. And now it was because of my involvement in the 2000 and the 2004 Olympics that I was eligible to apply to be an Olympian artist in residence. So now we get to recent activity. The Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage invited some select artists and designers from around the world to submit proposals for a newly envisioned creative opportunity for the rescheduled 2021 Olympics. Originally, I had sent in a proposal for an interactive installation for the 2020 Olympics as they were originally planned. But with COVID and, the Olympics, just like everything else in our lives, has been affected drastically. So the Olympics were postponed for a year. And this Olympic Foundation for Culture and Heritage had to re-envision what they could do in terms of inviting artists and designers to participate creatively. Nothing could be interactive. No, they didn't want any crowds around each other. They didn't want people too close to each other or touching anything. So they reached out to a few people who had submitted proposals originally and invited us to resubmit something that would be this time printed on site in Tokyo as banners. So these are large scale curtains, like 10 feet by 4 feet. Eventually, 6 of us were chosen in total, 5 of us being Olympians, 1 Paralympian. I was the only graphic designer out of the group and one of 2 Americans that were chosen. And we were tasked with designing or creating a series of Norin curtains, which are traditional Japanese panels that typically hang in entryways. And we were asked to visualize resilience, determination, optimism, and global solidarity that are ingrained in sport and cultural values. Throughout this process, we were also asked to document our own creative process, something I don't often do. So I had my son taking photographs over my shoulder as I was working on this. Just with all my other work, I started by photographing and sketching. So again, always working with my own photography. As I was sketching here, I typically will sketch visually and also textually at the same time, because as a graphic designer, I'm typically working with typography and words and sentences. I want it to be sure that those 2 elements are inextricably linked. And on the left, this is where I'm sitting right now, my workspace at home. I would work with the sketches and try to bring those onto screen. maybe a typical misconception about graphic design is that we do everything on screen, but I'm really a big believer in the hand processes and the sketching. I have my students do this. It's the part that I enjoy the most. And on the right, something that was interesting about this project, because the curtains were going to be printed in Japan, we got to send them preliminary pieces of the curtains that we were working with. And then the master printer would send us print tests on the fabric to see how the color and the resolution would hold up as it was soaked into that fabric that we would be ultimately printing on. And what I'm going to show you now is just my process, my creative process. So I mentioned that I always work with the text. As I was sketching and continuing to kind of narrow things down, I came up with this statement that really drove me throughout the entire process. The human spirit prevails. We celebrate together in peace, in joy, in hope, in honor, and in sport. And what I'm showing you here is a screen grab from my Illustrator work area, but you should look at these as series across. So look horizontally to understand what the series is starting to do. You can see in some of these top ones, I'm trying to think about if a circle, the abstracted circle shape, could imply or convey athletic prowess or competition or camaraderie. We were not allowed to use the Olympic rings, but we could use the circle. And I thought maybe that was a nice possibility. You'll also notice that as we look through some of these images, some of them are pretty complex and they're splicing images together or overlaying different textures and images that I had taken and collected. This one especially gets kind of complex as we get down to the bottom right-hand corner and probably across that whole bottom series. Throughout the project here, I would create a new set and send it to the Olympic Committee, and they would review it carefully for a week or two and get a lot of feedback from the entire committee, and then send back their opinions and preferences. That was really helpful. They were great. They're not really clients, but if I would call them a client, they were great clients to work with. After I sent them some initial ones, then this was my second group that I worked on and sent to them. Again, we're looking across here. At this point, I had originally thought I was going to be designing 3 curtains, but at this point they asked if I could design 5. So that was almost overwhelming because that's 2 more than I thought I had taken on, and it was a tight timeline and a little nerve-wracking, but also really exciting. So I'll kind of walk through the variations here. The top one you can see is kind of bookended with a white circle versus a black circle, the black circle being integrated into the word sport. You guys may recognize the imagery here in the second series. This is all from Pictured Rocks. Those are photographs that I took there. The third series uses the colors from the Olympic rings and divides them individually across the 5 panels. And then the fourth series, I'm working with integrating the text, almost hiding it and camouflaging it within these panels. I should mention that I thought this might be a unique direction to take. I wanted to avoid representation of the human form because I didn't want to imply anything too specific in terms of gender or nationality or body type or ability or sport. You know, I didn't want this to be just about rowing or about track and field. I wanted it to really be very open and something that could relate across cultures and times and genders and preferences of different kinds of sports and anything like that. So here are a few close-ups. In this series, which I think came from the last one on the previous slide, I was working with line elements. I saw this as related to the circles that are used in the Olympic rings, just represented differently, this time as a starburst, which could be integrated into the text and the image in different ways. And with this, I was thinking of the word together could be implied by the lines that were meant to reference the maps that you see of flights when you're on an airplane and you pull the little pamphlet out from behind the chair, the seat in front of you, and it has all the different routes that you can take from the different airports. That's what those curved lines were meant to represent. In the bottom one, the type is trying to be integrated into the space in a playful and spatial way. So in peace, in honor, in joy, in hope, in sport. So responding to the feedback that they gave me on that last set, then I moved towards this. You can see now I'm working with the integration of an angled element that's brought across the series here. It intersects and then it shifts direction. I thought that could be a nice way to work with the long horizontal format in a dynamic way that is variable across the 5 panels, but also creating unity across these that could start to look pretty different. I was also trying to figure out which images to work with and how to integrate the type into each of those. And here's some close-ups. It was at about this point that the news from Tokyo was sounding like there wouldn't be foreign spectators allowed. And so what had originally sounded like it would be really a global audience for these curtains, it was sounding more likely that it would really just be the Japanese audience primarily. So with that, I started thinking about bringing Japanese characters into these panels. I'm also still working with legibility and degrees of overlap here across these 4 panels. So the question of integrating Japanese is tricky. I wanted, first of all, to be sure it was accurate. I definitely did not want to use Japanese characters that would be misrepresentational of what I intended them to be or how I intended them to be understood. So I was in touch with 3 different people who were fluent in Japanese to make sure. There's so much nuance, I think, with the different areas of Japan and the context in which these characters are used, that there's a lot of room for variability. And this was tricky because Japanese can be read, it can be set vertically or horizontally. I thought setting it vertically could make it more different and clearly different than the English, but it also posed challenges because of the scale was diminished because of the height of the proportion of the curtains. I haven't mentioned this yet either, but each of these panels that look like one solid format right now would actually be cut into 5 strips. So each of the curtains would be waving and looking pretty much like 5 separate strips. They'd be joined at the top only. So I was also working within that kind of secondary grid and knowing that I didn't want to go across a seam or anything. Something that was tricky with the translation was that the human spirit prevails was a lot of Japanese characters, and we celebrate together was a lot of Japanese characters. But a happy accident was that peace and joy and hope and honor and sport were, well, not sport, but those 4 first words were just 2 Japanese characters. And I thought that was like an epiphany of a moment to think, maybe I don't need the first part of the phrase. Maybe I can just focus on peace, joy, hope, honor, and sport, and let it be more simplified and poetic in a way. And I didn't mind that sport was 4 different characters because it makes sense that that's really when the entire message comes together with that one word. So it makes sense that that's an outlier. Through these, I was working with hierarchy, where should the English fall on hierarchy and where should the Japanese fall on hierarchy? I also recognized that the graphic nature of the Japanese characters was something so beautiful that I wanted to work with them in a bold way. So some close-ups here of what those variations were. And I was still trying to figure out if I wanted to use the circular element in instead of the O that came with that font. But then I kind of came to the point where I recognized that sport should really be something very distinct from the other 4 panels. So these were the last couple that I sent to them for review. I stuck with the idea of the angles that are progressively changing across these panels that then intersect at the O of hope, and then turn the, kind of rotate to head in the opposite direction for the last 2 panels. And I'll just go through these last final panels. This is the final selection. So these Norn curtains attempt to capture many things simultaneously. They represent micro and macro moments that may occur during Shinrin Yoku, forest bathing, being calming and balancing and healthful and hopeful and rich with wonder. Whoops, there we go. The inherent need of humans to connect with the natural environment is a thread that all cultures share. And these curtains visualize the parallels between our shared experiences with nature and our shared experiences through the Olympics. For these final panels, the letter forms and the images were placed specifically to coincide with the strips that were cut in the panels. And here you can see them installed in Tokyo. They were in the Nihonbashi underground passageway for 2 weeks before the Olympics, and then through the Olympics and 2 weeks after. I would have loved to have been there in person, but I, just like everyone else, was not allowed to travel to be there. Instead, we did a lot of social media that tried to connect us with the public and be able to talk about this project and experience it as best as we could. But I have seen a video of these, and it's beautiful how they kind of flutter and change as people walk by. The whole series is called Together in Sport. And as I finish up here, I'm going to show you the other people who were included as Olympian artists in residence. There was Slaven, who participated in athletics in 2008. He was Slovakian and a painter. And Sierra in volleyball in 2012, photographer, British. Hannah, soccer in 2012 and 2016, and then she did make it to Tokyo 2020. She was a graffiti artist from New Zealand. Gregory Burns, a swimming Paralympian in Barcelona, Atlanta, and Sydney. He was also American. Roald, track and field in Los Angeles 84 and Seoul 88, British in painting, and then myself. And I really was so excited about this project because I felt like it was the first time that these 2 parts of myself, of my experience of graphic design and rowing, could finally come together in a way that I had essentially tried to avoid. I always felt like rowing maybe wasn't relevant to my work in graphic design. Although I do recognize that my inspiration to work for environmental consciousness and action is definitely inspired by all of my time on the water and traveling. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that. And then if anyone has any questions, you can just leave them in the chat or raise your hand.
I have to say, it's really nice to see such a full crowd here. And a recently retired favorite colleague of mine is one of them. So when I saw Susan Bandy's pop in, I got a little shot of adrenaline and thought, oh boy. Hi, Susan. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Kelly. That was great. What happens to the banners now? Will they ever be shown again?
That's such a good question. They are at the Japanese Olympic Museum. They were given to the museum, and I have seen photographs of them up in that museum. And I hope that they're going to be shown again. And actually, I would really like to travel there someday so I can see them in person, because it sounds like they'll be part of their collection from now on.
That's great.
You're thinking like a curator and a museum director, aren't you?
All right, I think Dr. Waller has a question.
Yeah, that was fascinating. Thank you. Your design is absolutely beautiful. I have a question about how you negotiate a transition from Olympic sport to design. I was as I mentioned in an email to you, a really, really bad rower. Once or twice we won. And there was a sense of camaraderie and euphoria that I still treasure well over 20 years later.
Yeah.
It must be very hard to give that up, particularly if you're rowing in a fall with people you know very well. How do you capture that now?
Admittedly, it was a very special time in my life. It really was. The people who I trained with and competed with will always hold a special part in my heart. And we've seen each other at our best and at our worst and at our most stressed out. And you really get to know somebody very well through all of that. I think I was lucky in terms of the transition. I was lucky that I always had these two passions. I started rowing when I was 14 in high school, and I grew up in a design household, and I always knew that I wanted to be a designer. So I felt like these two paths were always parallel to each other, and I chose an undergraduate program where I could do both. That was not the case in grad school, but I found myself at an excellent graduate program at the Rhode Island School of Design. But I was training by myself there and coaching at Brown University because they had a great rowing program, and driving to Princeton, New Jersey, which is where the national team was at the time, on the weekends. So, there was some really tricky years there where I was trying to keep up with everything. But by the point that I got to when I was ready to retire from training, so in 2005, or trained from competition, I would say, I was lucky at that point because I had given attention and fostered my own design education and gone through a graduate program, and I was teaching at the college level already when I was on my last national team. I think there are a lot of people who train for not just rowing, but any Olympic sport that let that be the sole focus. So when the time comes when you're injured or you're too old or you just don't make it and you keep trying, or whatever point that is, that, it's time to kind of hang up the oars, it's hard to figure out what to do next. So it was a relatively easy transition for me in that respect, but it was really hard to say, okay, this is it. This was my last national team. It was very bittersweet. I remember having a very difficult conversation with the national team coach. And I said, my body is aching and I don't have the bloodthirsty drive that I did when I was in my 20s. And all my friends are married and they have houses and jobs. And, I feel like I'm not growing up with the rest of them. I think it's time for me to move on. And he said, well, you could keep going. You could be as good as you are now, if not better, but you can't work somewhere else. You need to train wherever the team is. which was a sacrifice at that point in my life. At 33, I wasn't ready to make. I just, it was time to settle down a little bit. It was difficult to be training as the full-time job and being ready to go train in altitude for a month or two and go race at Worlds through the summer and go to different races. And I was living in people's attics for free. I slept in a garage for a while in Princeton. I was, really scraping by because you don't make money being a national team rower. You're living on a stipend of about, I can't remember if it was $200 or $400 a month. And that was only if you were ranked in the top 10 each month. So if you got injured or you were ill or you just were having a bad season, you didn't get that stipend. So, life was interesting. I will say that moment when I signed the paper and said, I am officially not going to be competing internationally anymore. It meant that the drug testers couldn't come find me at 11 o'clock the night before Thanksgiving and knock on my front door unannounced and make me pee in a cup. Like you really were on a tight leash. You needed to tell them where you were every hour of every day. And if your plan changed and you didn't tell them, you were docked 1 of 3 strikes before you were banned. So, it was quite a lifestyle. And I also never had to do another erg test. So John, you probably know what erg tests are. It's the stationary rowing machines, which are absolute torture devices because you're putting all your effort into it and all you have to look at is a computer screen and you're not going anywhere and there's nobody in the boat with you. You're just on your own. We had to do those to get ranked every month. And so that day when I said, okay, I'm never going to do another erg test again, was also reason for celebration.
I very much sympathize.
Yeah.
All right then. Carol Swinehart had a question. She was wondering if there was a particular aspect of rowing that really connected you with graphic design, or.
Well, I have a few ways to answer that. One thing is I think I myself as a graphic designer and as an educator function best when I get a row in the morning or I have that balance in my life on a regular basis. It's not happening now because it's snowy outside, but in the warmer months, I really feel balanced and calm when I have a good rowing workout. And of course, the rowing workouts are much different now that I'm not training and competing than they were when I was younger. Now it's really meditative. I have a single that I keep at the Ann Arbor Rowing Club here, which is just a community club. And I never have a coach with me and there's nobody else in the boat and I can just go out and listen for the sound of the oars entering the water and leaving the water and the drips coming off of those oars as they go back for another stroke. And I'm watching the geese fly overhead and looking at the blue heron on the shore and trying not to hit the ducks that are crossing in front of the boat. And I'm, it's all my senses that are tapped in. And I really think that is a big connection between me and all the work in graphic design that I've done that's so environmentally focused. In that Olympic Agora project, 3 of those 5 images that I used are of water. And so I'm really drawn to water. I chose the house that I live in now because it's really close to the Huron River. Anytime I go over, if I'm driving past a body of water or over a bridge over the water, I look at that body of water and imagine what it would be like to row on it. And I find a lot of inspiration out there every time I'm out there. Yeah, I'm very lucky to be able to be out there in the boat. And I definitely bring it back to graphic design. A lot of the time daydreaming when I'm rowing is thinking about what my next project will be or what I can bring from that row into my next project. I keep thinking I should mount a GoPro on my head and video this experience on a foggy morning when the sun is coming up, and use that in a presentation that I could share about connecting these two things. Looks like maybe a question from the Robertson room.
You really answered my question in your last response. I was curious if you got out on the water for pleasure and the extent to which it really connected with nature and that influenced your work as well. You talked about the meditative aspect of being on the water, and I've enjoyed that myself. But how about the connection with nature, and how does that influence your work?
So here's a really distinct example. We've probably all heard about the PFAS pollution in Michigan because of fire retardant chemicals that are making their way into our waterways. On the Huron River, it's really bad. And it's so obvious and so evident because we'll be out there and there's huge mounds of this yellow foam floating down the river. And we know that, I mean, you're not supposed to have skin contact with that stuff. And if I would swipe through that with my boat, and then later I have to dry off my boat, I'm gonna get all that PFAS stuff all over my shoulder as it drips down my body as I'm walking the boat up and as I dry the boat off, and then I'm touching the towels. So I'm out there literally slaloming in between these huge foam piles of toxic chemicals, thinking, this is crazy. This is a beautiful body of water in a beautiful state. And how did we ever let it get to this? You know, and it's that kind of specific moment where I think, okay, what can I do about this? I've reached out to an environmental organization here in Ann Arbor saying, what can I do as a designer to help you fight this PFAS problem? Or that we also have a dioxane plume moving towards our water source in Ann Arbor. So I've reached out to them. You know, on one hand, I think graphic design can be really powerful because we share ideas. People are communicating visually more and more. On the other hand, how much can one graphic designer do? So it's kind of disheartening, you know, to have kind of a shot of reality. I keep kind of pushing and hoping that my work will have some impact, but who knows? If I were a politician or a policymaker or the owner of the company that's making the fire retardant chemicals, then I know that that would be a much more immediate and widespread impact. But maybe talking about it too has ramifications. I bring this into my classroom. I hope so. I hope it helps.
All right. And what was it? Carol was wondering how to incorporate the motion of rowing in the static aspect of graphic design. Very interesting question.
That is such a great question. Carol, if you have any good ideas, share them with me. Aside from taking a video.
Well, must graphic design always be static? And your product, whether it's a poster or, you know, cover of a book or illustration, is there a way to, you know, have, I guess, maybe the tactile sense of motion rowing?
I think you're absolutely right, actually. So of course, a time-based thing like video could capture it, and maybe I have to think about that. I think my series, especially the red one, is knowing that it takes a sequence of time or a span of time to look across that series, and knowing that, you know, the angle, for instance, was ticking downward as the series goes across. I think that can imply motion. But I think you're really right on with like the dimensionality of an object or a three-dimensional piece, because it is reliant upon a span of time to really understand it from every point of view and to interact with it. I think that's spot on. These are great questions.
Are you connecting with any environmental groups specifically with your work?
Sorry, did you say, am I working with any environmental groups specifically with my work?
Yeah.
So I'm a member of what's called Climate Designers, which is an international organization of designers across disciplines of design that are really intent on making wise choices and not only doing less bad, but doing good, and designing for what should be circular instead of cradle to grave, but something that can nourish the earth, and continue to replenish what we typically would just take away from and leave. I'm the Green Map project that I was partnering with River Raisin Institute. I haven't been in touch with them since the pandemic started, but I would like to work with them again. They were really great. And the next thing I'm thinking about is to try to identify people to collaborate with and reach out to in Iceland, because I think Iceland for me has always been a really mysterious place that has some extreme weather and conditions that they have to respond to, almost in a way that could be a precursor to the extreme climate change that we're all facing and will face. And I'm interested in reaching out to them and seeing how they may be efficiently working within the major climate changes that they're experiencing just annually, not even because of climate change, but and the local materials. That's the other thing. Materiality goes back to the circular economy, but what materials can I use as a graphic designer that don't deplete the environment, but could replenish and re-nourish the environment? The tools, materials, and substances to use. Yeah. So can I just go ahead and answer this next question from Carol? So one thing that I always avoid is anything petroleum based. So for printing, it used to be that any commercial printing was using petroleum based ink. Now, most of them are switching to soy based ink. So I always specify soy based. I try to print locally. I have a favorite paper that's created in Niles, Michigan. It's called French Paper Company. And it's, I think they've been around for over 100 years, and it's a hydro-powered factory. And I always spec 100% post-consumer waste paper. So I really try never to use virgin sourced paper products. Any paper that I print a project on should come from it should be entirely from a recycled stock. And then something else I've been playing with a bit more in specific kind of research projects is not using any ink at all, and just working with volume and layers. So like laser cutting, I've done posters. I didn't show any to you, but posters that are entirely created with layers of that recycled paper. So there's no ink, and it limits the amount of materials and processes that are being used to create that piece. More and more though, Carol, I'm really thinking about going out into my yard and seeing if I can make a panel out of the birch bark that's always peeling off my birch trees. Or, I mean, I don't want it to be hokey, but what can I find in my yard that I know is biodegradable that could be used as a creative material? And I don't know. I'm also looking at things in my kitchen, like onion skin. and I've been doing a lot of research on bio-based materials. There are people out there making film out of what would be trashed parts of, this sounds strange, but like animal bones after meat processing. Instead of just tossing the animal bones, maybe it could be used as a film that could then package the meat that has just been processed. So, you know, there are so many possibilities out there. Algae is something that's coming up as a interesting possibility. Oh yeah. Zach, should I read this next one?
Yeah, go for it.
So Kathy asks, in the colors you use, do you consider if there are hazardous components used to produce the colors, such as mercury, lead, and other heavy metals? Yeah. And I think those are probably things I don't know about much. I'm definitely conscientious in terms of, and I'm just talking on a daily basis, the materials and the chemicals that we know are coming into contact with. Phthalates. What are the other ones? There's so many. I'm buying more and more natural ingredients from the farmer's market to try to, you know, bars of soap to wash my hair instead of the bottles of shampoo. In terms of design, I'm not sure where the mercury and lead and other heavy metals is, but I'm sure it's in there. Even the laptops we work on are full of these, you know, toxic chemicals and metals that have been extracted from the earth in terrible practices and in inhumane practices. So it's quite a tough spot that we find ourselves in right now. Nancy asks, have you considered integrating your several artistic design dimensions with sound or music of some sort? Yes, I would love to do that. And my husband is a middle school band director. So when I first met him, that was really an idea that I had early on, that it would be great to collaborate with him somehow. I've done a couple posters back in grad school trying to visualize music through graphic elements, like in a way of someone who can't read music. How do you visualize music? But I do love that idea, and that's on my list of things I would love to do.
What the reason for the question was that you talked about the sound of the oars going in the water and that feeling in nature where there's all kinds of sound. So that's where that question came from.
Yeah. And when you mentioned the sounds in nature, I mean, it could be kind of a sound map of all of the things that we really probably don't pay attention to. But if we do, almost like the mindset that we can put ourselves in with forest bathing, what are those things that we would hear that are not man-made? Yeah, or music, because that's a beautiful man-made sound.
I think Dr. Orlock had a question or two.
I didn't have a question. Oh, wait a minute. But one did just come to mind. But before that, does anybody else in this room want to ask a question? Kelly, I'm curious about when you know that a piece of work is ready. You showed us such a long process of evolution. Do you have a strong intuitive sense when you've got it right? Or is it, I know when something's finished because the deadlines arrive. But how does that work for you?
Deadlines are a great motivator. And makes it really clear when something has to come to an end. I don't know. I think things could really keep going and going. And when I show a body of work like I did tonight, I almost feel like they're steps along a journey. And the next thing I do will just be a continuation from that, which probably I wouldn't have gotten to if I hadn't done all those previous steps. I have noticed that sometimes when I'm designing something and I'm really, at a roadblock and I just don't think any of my ideas are good, but I know that I need to get moving on, I just need to push ahead. I'll make myself work with, a few options and then gradually be able to narrow it down. But I have found that sometimes those projects that I think I'm not going to get anywhere and I'm not going to have any good ideas for end up being the ones that I'm most proud of and actually surprise me, instead of having a pretty clear idea of where I'm headed and feeling like, oh yeah, this is really going to be good. And then it just doesn't, it doesn't get anywhere any better than that. It's those ones that I don't have a whole lot of confidence in that sometimes are surprising as they get further along if I really push it. Yeah, but in terms of knowing when something's done, I'm not sure I ever really do. And the Olympic panels I thought were it's kind of funny for me to see how simple they ended up as, because I was really starting much more complex in how I was considering those. But the Olympic committee just kind of kept pushing me, I think, in a very good direction towards clarity and simplicity. But to look at them in their finished state, I think, well, that must have been really easy. That must have been a really quick project, And then I think of everything that came before and think, well, I threw out all the other options that were way too complex and convoluted. So.
I have a personal question to kind of follow up on Dr. Waller's. Are there any projects or works that you know, having the skills and experience that you do now, wish you could go back and retouch or redo in a different way?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of those. The further back they get, the more I'd want to retouch them. I think I'm happy to recognize, I think I continue to evolve and develop in my skills. And, even 10 years ago, there are things that I look at in that work and say, oh, well, now I can see what I should have done here. And even if it's just a little tweak, I think there's always something that could be a little better. I drive my students crazy with this also. And Susan, you'll appreciate this, that I don't give them any 4.0s. It just needs to be absolutely everything that could have been done and so well executed and thoughtful, and all the possibilities should have been tried before they get to that. I give a lot of 3.98s and it's not to crush their spirits, but it's how I think of my own work. And also I think it leaves, a little sliver of recognizing for them that there's always more to do. There could be something done just a little bit better. And it always, if anybody has a 3.98, they always get rounded up to a 4.0 for that final grade at the end of the semester anyway. So there's no hard feelings there, but getting those throughout the semester is a reminder.
All right, thanks. And then Catherine was wondering, is when you row for pleasure, do you use an open or closed Orlock?
It sounds like Kathy is a rower. That's a very in the know question. So I use a closed Orlock, and they're plastic and they have a metal bar at the top that you have to screw tight. But I bet you're thinking about the open Orlock and some of the not the racing shells, but different rowing shells that can just be open at the top. That would be tricky to kind of keep everything under control in the racing shells. Everything is so controlled and locked in. We have our feet locked in. The only part of our body that's moving in relationship to the boat is the seat, because we're on a seat with 4 wheels. And so we're really kind of pulling the boat underneath our body when we come up to the catch. And then we're pushing the boat behind us with our feet as we take a stroke with the oars in the water. It's a full body motion that gets you tired really fast. And if it's done well, it looks easy. But if it looks sloppy and difficult, then they're probably not doing it very well. So the first days of rowing for a high school team, when they're all called novices, it looks not very choreographed.
I think we've lost Zach again. The internet at MSU is a disaster today.
Yeah.
So I think it's been coming in and out. We do have time for maybe one last question. Okay, well, I'll do the honors given that Zach is no longer with us. Kelly, thanks so much. It was a real privilege hearing from you and to learn about really an amazingly accomplished career. So thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you also for that wonderful image of the oars dipping into the water.
Yep, bring it right back.
Was soothed by thinking about it.
Yep. It's a great sensation.
So thanks again, and thanks everybody for attending. Oh, Carol, is that a question?
Yes. The Boys in the Boat is a great book about the Olympic team that was competing during World War II. Outstanding book. And yes, there should be a Girls in the Boat book. There are some books. There's one called The Red Rose Crew, which is all about Carrie Graves and the 1980 Olympic team. And actually Carrie Graves really unfortunately just passed away, I would say probably a month ago. She was a legend of rowing and just an absolute figure who touched many lives, including my own. She was outstanding. But yeah, these stories of the competition and training are really amazing. So Boys in the Boat is a great book. Red Rose Crew is also a great book.
Thank you. Last thing I need to do is let everyone know who is speaking next week. We're going to be joined by Dr. Artemis Spyrou of the National Superconducting Cyclotron Laboratory. One of the I'm probably not the only one here who's somewhat terrified and awed by physics, but Dr. Spyrou is a winner of a number of teaching awards. So I think whatever she conveys will be understandable and fascinating. And the title of her talk is extremely enticing as well: Bringing the Stars Down to Earth with the Most Powerful Accelerator in the World. I think that's pretty unmissable. So again, thank you, Kelly, and everybody for joining, and hope to see you here next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Many thanks, Kelly.
Oh yeah. Thank you, John. That was fun.
Yeah, it's great. Oh, sorry, I've got.
Oh, you're muted.
I can still remember the agony of the ergo. In fact, I bought one a few years ago, and it's sat unused in my garage for about 2 years now.
Yeah, then you can't get away from it when you own one of those.
Yes, yeah, it makes me feel guilty every morning when I see it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, yeah. Many thanks, Kelly.
Yes.
Good night.